Okay, I think we'll make a start. Welcome everybody. Welcome to those, if this is your first Calico webinar, and a very warm welcome to anyone who's joined us for the last webinars we've done approximately once a month for about the last 6 months. So welcome back. Today we're talking about a very hot topic of managing remote teams, and we'll talk about that in a moment. First of all, just some meeting etiquette and how we run these sessions, some admin. So please remain on mute unless you are actually presenting or for the chat and discussion afterwards. Do ask any questions via the chat function to everybody. It's really good when we get input and questions from the audience, or just message me if you want to ask a question, and I'll put it to the speaker at the end. And the Zoom session will be left open after 3 o'clock for any questions and chat with the speakers and anyone in the audience as well. So that's how we run these. If you're new to Calico, just a very small introduction to who we are and what we do. We are a group of trusted expert suppliers. I am the founder of the group, having spent 20 years in the legal sector, doing lots of different things, including technology. But our purpose really is to gather the immense amount of business knowledge and knowledge within really, really great suppliers in this market and share it with you. Obviously, we have an ulterior motive. We want to get to know you. We want to get to know your firms better. But also we have a huge amount of business know-how that we want to share to help and support anyone that manages or runs a law firm. So that's what we're all about, and the webinar program is part of that, as well as things like our Calico news app, our Compass magazine of the best articles, useful guides, once every 6 months at the moment, which is online. So look out for the next issue, which is going to be issued very shortly. And also, obviously we publish 5 days a week on LinkedIn. So hop over to LinkedIn and follow us, then you'll see all the articles as they're published almost every day. And there's my email address if you have any queries on anything you hear today, or you'd like to hear more about what the whole group can offer you to help your law firm move forward. So who are we? Well, we're a very eclectic collaboration of suppliers in the market. We all do different things, but the main thing is everybody has a very deep track record of delivery and success in working with law firms specifically. So if you do get in contact with anyone in the group, you'll know that they understand the legal sector and have worked with many law firms before. And they are handpicked and vetted to join, so they come with my personal recommendations as well. You can hop over to the website and look at the member infographic, which tells you everything about what all the suppliers do, or contact details, and also you can download that for reference as a PDF. Comes in handy when something comes up in a partner or a directors meeting where you say we need help with that, and there's likely to be someone in the group that can help you. Heads up, we do hold these webinars approximately once a month. So the next one is scheduled for 27th of May, hosted by Patricia Kinahan, who's partner at Hazelwoods, and Stuart Gibson, who's the MD of Acorn Business Finance. We wanted to hold one on law firm funding and finance best practice. They'll be covering things like specific knowledge from the budget, for example, with relevance to law firms, and also the funding picture for law firms, ranging from mergers and acquisitions right through to funding PII, which is going to be another hot topic this year for firms. In fact, Lockton will be hosting our July webinar all about professional indemnity insurance, so don't miss that one either. But that's the May one, so put that in your diary. You'll hopefully see the invitations coming out for that, and join Trish and Stuart on the 27th of May. So we do have just 4 attendees, and this will be sent out to you as an email from Calico around about 4 o'clock. Some really useful resources from all of the key partners. Do take a look through those. There's no obligation to buy anything. They're there purely to help your firm. And also some feedback, a feedback link from my point of view. We'd really like some feedback on how you find today's webinar, some ideas and preferences on future topics, just to help us refine this series and make it as useful as possible. So, to the hot topic of the day. We've talked a lot about agile working this year, and we've all done it for the last year or so. If you were here for the 25th of March webinar, you will know that our straw poll that we did on the day, 80% of the attendees said they were looking to flex working arrangements for staff. Their top concerns around that were around supervision, culture, and the technology to do so. But they're also looking for benefits. So the top 3 benefits that attendees had from last month were staff retention, staff well-being, and actually the opportunity for out of our area recruitment, which are all great benefits for your firm and your people. Which is good, because as surveys of lawyers have revealed, there is an absolute appetite in this market for more flexible working. And some research by Arden Partners from an economic and finance point of view estimates that maybe 1/3 of lawyers may be working under the consultant banner within the next 5 years or so. Obviously, they're looking at that from a corporate finance point of view, but it is backed up by another survey from Acritas, part of Thomson Reuters, that interviewed about 800 lawyers, and about 22% of those said they would consider changing firms if they weren't allowed greater flexibility within their role. So clearly there's an underlying appetite for this. We've all had a lot of agile home working in the last year. We've seen the pros and the cons, and it's likely that moving forward, we'll be looking at a hybrid arrangement for many firms moving forwards. But today is all about how to then manage effectively within that model, addressing some of those key concerns. So we have a lovely field of expert speakers today, and I'm very pleased to hand over to Martyn Best, first of all, who's Managing Director of Document Direct, to hear from Martyn about how they manage their remote teams. Thank you, Martyn.
Yeah, thank you, Pauline, and good afternoon, everyone, from a very sunny Liverpool, and happy Earth Day to you all. I'm going to be giving you maybe a slightly different perspective on this subject matter. I know we've got 3 very able and capable speakers following me, so if you don't like what I'm saying, don't worry, it won't last too long. And then Alex, Victor, and Nicola will regale you with some more focused issues on managing remote teams. What I'd like to sort of throw towards you in the next few minutes is perhaps a slightly different perspective on elements that managing a remote team do throw out. And I'd like to throw out something to you on the next slide, which is the possibility of unperceived existence. This is clearly something that was top of the list in your mind last year when the prospect of managing your remote team came to the fore. Can something exist without being perceived by consciousness? And I've no doubt that you've all heard about the that wonderful philosophical question, which was bizarrely first heard in about the 18th century by a philosopher called George Berkeley. Is sound only heard if a person hears it? Next slide, please. And if a tree falls in the woods, no one's there to hear it. Does it make a sound? And is this how you might view your team? Next, please. And clearly, the trees would hear it. Sometimes they don't. And is this sort of mindset, does this occupy your management board report? Do you feel you need the tree police? And it begs the question, if you can't see your team, how do you know that they're working? and moving on from one great philosopher to another. And it's something that I've always wanted to introduce into a webinar, which is my and actually Alex's great love of Marvel superheroes. So I'm sure, no doubt, you've heard with great power comes great responsibility. You might have thought that was first heard by Sam Lee in the middle and spoken by, of course, Uncle Ben. But it was actually first voiced at the 1793 French National Convention. In those immortal words, ils doivent envisager qu'une grande responsabilité est la suite inséparable d'un grand pouvoir. Representatives, and that can in this context be either us or our workforce, must contemplate that a great responsibility is the inseparable result of great power. And on to the next slide, please. Because that great power is actually what we do delegate down to our teams, our staff, our people, our partners, our workforce. And on the next slide, we do actually recall what we used to have. And of course, in managing a workforce, we didn't have all of this remote elements, or not to the degree that we've experienced in the last 12 months. We had them all neatly sitting nearby, neatly sitting in lovely rows, all accessible, and in an old-fashioned sense, all monitorable. But no longer, as we can next see. We have these wonderful, varied environments, which we have all seen over the last 12 months. And to many of us, that's been a source of great flexibility. Many of us have adapted to it. And after 12 months of doing it, we quite like it. But as a manager of remote teams, does this cross your mind on the next slide? And some interesting tech businesses have developed over the last 12 months with, would you believe, in this enlightened environment, remote employee monitoring, time tracking solutions. I don't know if I've seen anyone put Big Brother posters up, but I'm sure it's not far from the mindset of some people less enlightened by those on this webinar. So this sort of philosophy throws up another question and another dilemma that we might have had in the past, which is captured on the next slide. And actually, as a trained chartered accountant, I can use the chief financial officer as someone who might voice what happens if we train them and they leave. The enlightened CEO, what happens if we don't and they stay? Of course, this isn't a dilemma in the slightest, as we all know. So leaving those two philosophical points aside, you might be asking me why I can voice any sort of expertise on this subject matter. And without, on the next slide, going too much detail into my experience over the last 12, 15 years, but at Document Direct, we have a fundamental basis of remote working, remote servicing of our clients. And those are the sort of services that we offer from a 100% remote environment. And with delivering services like that, we have had to embrace managing remote teams. And as a consequence, we've learned on the next slide, what are the sort of issues that we have to deal with. I'm sure you, in different degrees, have come across these over the last 12 months. I'm not actually going to go into too much detail in any of those first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points. Alex and Victor are going to touch upon some of them in some very, very thoughtful detail. I'm going to concentrate on the managing of your staff and teams. And on the next slide, I'm going to slightly adapt those few words. Because I would personally view it, it's not about management, it's about engagement. And on the next slide, let me sort of reflect on some of the actual specific examples that we in Document Direct, and I'm sure many of you have come across. You might sort of think a couple of these are quite useful little tips. They're not rocket science, but we're not in rockets. And these are just little pointers that work and keep our staff engaged and our teams involved in everything we do. So on a literally daily basis, we will send out 2 or 3 daily random acts of communication. It's particularly our ops team who do this, because we engage with just about 200 or so typists and PAs. They're all home-based. They will have different levels of social engagement with their peers, with their clients, with us. And it can, of course, be quite a lonely environment out there if you don't factor that into your communication. So we will just pick something up. Pauline, my ops director, and our help desk team will send out a random email. They just look through all the communications we've had from clients. Mostly they'll be engaging with us for bits of work. We'll see somebody who's done something, not necessarily over and beyond the act of duty, but something that they've done, and we'll just give them a little thank you for them. We'll give them a little update on something that we'll be doing within the business, and we'll just keep that engaged. So adapting that daily random acts of kindness, which you'll have heard about. Clearly, we will all, even greater in the last 12 months, have been using email, WhatsApp. We'll be setting tasks for people. And that's a very unsocial way of doing things. Do not forget, we all still have the phone. If we can't go and see people and talk with them face to face, and this is a sort of face to face, but with a screen, pick up the phone, call them. And in relation to that, Zoom, let me see how many of you have not got your camera on. Now, of course, I appreciate you're not directly engaging with us at the moment, but the majority of you do not have your camera on. So next time you're on a Zoom or a webinar, put your camera on. That at least shows a little bit more of engagement, and most particularly with your own team. You should almost have a rule that no one should be allowed not to have their camera on. You're slowly losing engagement and communication if you don't. Likewise, keep your meetings regular, keep them short. You will have all standard meetings set up, team meetings, etc. But again, going back to my first little point, 2 or 3 little random acts of communication. Have 1 or 2 5-minute Zooms. Just set something in the diary or send someone out a random invite. Just have 5 minutes. Now, we all recall that phrase, it's not one of my favorite phrases, but it sums it up, those water cooler moments, or the moments in the kitchen when you're making a cup of coffee, you just have that random chat with someone. Send them a random Zoom meeting out. And then, of course, we are all social. Everything is all about people. So one of the things that we have done, and many others, and I'm sure you've been engaged and invited to, is Zoom wine meetings, Zoom quizzes, Zoom magic, Zoom cocktails. We just started a book club at Document Direct. Once a month, whoever wants to comes up with a book. Could be anything, to be honest. There are some that I don't attend, but it's suitable for some sectors of our workforce. There's also yoga and a wellbeing chats coming up over the next few months within Document Direct. David Gilroy of Conscious Solutions, who I'm sure many of you know, put on an instructional cartoon session last week for people. Entirely random, entirely weird at first glance, but it was really good, really drew people in, made them smile. We used to have Skype coffee mornings in the early days of Document Direct, where people would just go onto Skype, have a 10-minute break with a coffee in hand. And all of those little tips, they just sort of retain that human element, that social engagement. And I think trying to sum up some of the things that I'm saying as a broad philosophy, think in terms of outputs, not hours. And I know clearly, we're all engaged one degree or another in the legal sector. And particularly from my accountancy background, it was about capturing time. But really it's about, and that's a useful and clearly important thing to do, but it's outputs that count, not hours. So it's about what your people do, and their output is not, are they doing it on a 9-to-5 basis? Do you need to monitor every single minute? And just finishing off on the next slide with another perspective from someone, and just adapting what John Kennedy said. That's not what your people can do for you. What can you do for your people? And then in my penultimate slide, just adapting the point about training people. What happens if we trust our people and they abuse it, says our CFO. Our enlightened CEO says, what happens if we don't trust them and they leave us? And I think my attitude and my point, I will leave you with one word before I pass you on to Alex. On the last slide, that one word sums up how to manage a remote workforce. And it clearly has to all ultimately be about trust. Even more so now that you can't revert to the old traditional ways of watching them, of observing them, etc. And trust clearly combines all of those 6 absolutely essential qualities in not managing a remote workforce, but managing a remote, productive and happy workforce. There I shall leave you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Martyn. That was a really good introduction and insight into how you're managing your people over the long term, which is really, really useful. I'd like to introduce you to Alex Holt from the Cash Room, who's also going to share his insights into managing a remote teams by design as well. So Alex, over to you.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. So thanks, Martyn. You'll be potentially distraught to hear that my talk will feature very little French and even fewer pictures of Spider-Man, but c'est la vie, I guess. So if we go to my first slide, I'm going to try and keep this really, I tried to be a bit more sort of structured in how I was thinking about this. I think when we're looking at kind of remote working and how we go about it, Martyn's position is one where they've kind of always operated remote staff. And I think for many of us, our experience might well chime with actually some of what you guys are experiencing as well. So I thought it'd be useful to look at kind of the starting point and think about where you are right now, I suppose, but also by looking at where we were in January 2020, I can show you the sort of journey that we went on. We had at that time about 170 law firm clients. We serviced all of them remotely. They're all shapes and sizes. And our kind of staff presence was based across 2 locations. We had a site in the northwest of England in Skelmersdale, and we had a site up in Livingston near Edinburgh, and staff roughly split between the 2, very roughly. As with most businesses at that time, our teams were sitting together. They were supervised by team leaders. There were kind of managers there. There were kind of all sort of levels of seniority within the business. We had our finance team based up in Livingston, and the admin and ops teams were sort of kind of across both offices. We'd already outsourced our tech support, so I suppose that was kind of quite a good move and was helpful. And we'd already started to communicate with our own clients and internally using a secure portal that basically has enabled us to kind of, as I'll go on to, enable us to keep in contact with our people, but also with our clients. And the point I make at the end is that quite an important one, we actually had a plan. We had, because of our remote operation for our clients, it was really important to us that we had the ability to keep that service live. So we'd once had a power outage about 4 or 5 years ago. Being a northern operation with Scottish businesses, we'd also suffered with snow where people wouldn't be able to get into the office. So we developed a quite detailed disaster recovery plan. And the idea behind that was business continuity. And what we wanted to make sure was that we could go on delivering our service no matter what. I have to say the plan we designed was not envisaging a pandemic. I suspect that many people had plans for disaster recovery that didn't feature pandemic, but the good news is that it worked. And I suppose the first point is to question even now whether people do have a plan, post-pandemic or not. Do we have a plan for how we're going to operate going forward if you've got a problem with your usual operating model? One thing I would say is, unlike one business we heard about, don't keep your disaster recovery plan only on your computer, because of course, if it goes down or if you can't get into your office, you can't actually get at your disaster recovery plan. So that's a bit of a problem. Next slide, please, Pauline. So what did we do when March 2020 and all its joys landed? So 2 weeks before it was mandated, we sent all our staff to work remotely. As I say, we implemented the plan that we already had. And one of the key things was that we had already got the right technology in place. For many people and many firms, I think the idea was sort of new, and that the idea was they'll just send people home with a laptop. And what they very quickly realized that it's not as simple as that. And kind of from an efficiency perspective, nothing else, but certainly from a security perspective, and things like having proper technology, which Victor will be able to talk about in a bit more detail later on, having a secure portal, all those things meant that we were able to operate securely and kind of in a way that worked for our people. They had the right kind of tech capability at home. We also have processes in place for team management. It made me laugh with Martyn's stuff. He's absolutely right. There has to be trust. There has to be kind of that to get that people will operate in different ways. But actually, that's good. I agree with it all, I promise. But equally, I think it's really important to be able to support, and sometimes understanding whether people are coping with the workloads and understanding how tasks are being managed. That's good as well. So we had the ability to provide, we'd already got the processes in place to manage, to monitor, to supervise, to train, and to provide support for our teams. And part of that was the activity management. So it was kind of, how do you know what they're doing? Well, part of it is having the kind of right tools in place. That can be because, to answer Martyn's question, that can be because as well, of course, when your remote clients are relying on certain activities to have happened, what you want to be sure is that someone is picking up a task. And so it's not necessarily a question of whether somebody is or isn't working. It's more for certainty's sake to make sure that a particular set of things are happening when they need to happen. So I promise you, we're not Big Brother, but it's quite useful from our client's point of view to be able to communicate in a way that they can see whether a task has been done or not. One of the other things, and I think probably everybody found this as a slightly unexpected challenge, was the well-being piece. And that was because, you know, shutting down offices working remotely was fine in one practical sense, but then we all had to learn that actually the length of time of doing that was something where you need to provide support, and that kind of dovetails with culture. And we've really made efforts, a bit like Martyn's thing with the yoga, not so much, but quite a lot of things like quizzes and wine and stuff like that, which have happened regularly, and sending little thank you gifts and having awards and sending, you know, and doing things at Christmas and all those kind of things that were part of making sure we still felt like a team. One of the challenges actually has been around bringing new staff on board. As an ex-lawyer myself, and a very old ex-lawyer, I was an article clerk many years ago, and the article clerks and trainees learn to this day has often been by osmosis of sitting in a room with someone and kind of listening and learning as they go along. So how do you replicate that? And so you need to think really carefully about your training and how you're going to go about it. And we've built up a really clear induction process and a method of training people and making them feel part of the teams. The final bit on kind of where what we did over the last year was communication sessions. I think it's a really good lesson, and Martyn mentioned it there. You've got to communicate with your team. You want them to kind of not have to learn as they would have done at the water cooler what's going on, and start actually taking the time to communicate with your teams and give your staff updates. And then final slide there, Pauline, please. So where we're at now and where we're going, we've grown really rapidly over the last year. So we've got about 225 client firms now and around 100 staff. Everybody's still remote right now. And we were able to reduce our office space. We were rather lucky that one of the bigger leases on one of the premises was up for renewal. So we kind of reviewed that and decided that we were going to do things differently forever now. So we will never go back to everybody being sat in an office. some lessons learned there was one of the key lessons was to ask the staff. We do regular staff surveys now on all sorts of issues, but one of the key things we did recently was a staff survey on, do you want to go back to an office? And it was very interesting. Out of the 100 people that we've got working for us, 4 people said that they wanted to work full-time in an office, which we will enable. So that was really interesting, because I suspect that if at the very beginning of the sending everybody home, and particularly after the first couple of weeks, when we first asked people whether they wanted to work from home or in the office, I guarantee a lot more people would have said they'd want to be in the office. And I think it's really kind of, people have taken a while, but now they really do like it. It's key to be flexible, and that's what we're going to aim to do. And one of the things that we've learned as well is things that might have been acceptable in the pandemic might not be now. People might have been prepared to work on a little desk in their bedroom. You can't expect people to do that in the long term. So part of what we'll be doing is making sure that when the offices reopen, those that aren't in an appropriate environment can come in and use the office space. We're introducing something called Work Where You Like, and that's basically giving people the choice, allowing them to work wherever they want, whenever they want, and giving them the right kind of induction and bringing them into the fold as an employee, no matter where they're based. We've got employees dotted in Lincolnshire now, and an employee in Omaha, in fact, in the US. So, you know, we're able to work in a way that suits everyone, and taking that hybrid approach, I think, is the future. So if anybody ever wants to ask any questions, we've got quite a bit of experience on all this, so please feel free to get in touch. Thanks.
Thank you, Alex. That was brilliant, as usual. Yes, there'll be time at the end for questions, and I'm going to be asking you to vote on a poll as well, so that we can follow up with some appropriate information. I'd like to introduce you to Victor Lizowski now from Matrix 247, who's going to touch on some of the technology things pertinent to remote working that also came up in last month's webinar. So Victor, I'm handing over to you now.
Thanks, Pauline. Okay, next slide, Pauline. So I just wanted to talk today a little bit about the technology side of supporting home, remote, flexible, agile, or hybrid working. I'm sure we've all heard it called a number of different things over the last 12 months or so. So just a little bit of background to ourselves. My role at Matrix is Head of Strategic Accounts. We work with over 150 law firms already. We're endorsed by the Law Society, and our group CEO, Stephen Pritchard, is the chairman of this Calico Legal Solutions Group. Next slide. So, as you can imagine, over the last 12 to 13 months, as a telecoms company supplying telephony, data services, mobiles, we've been extremely busy, focused on supporting a lot of our existing customers in their flexible working strategy. So, like I said before, we're going to focus today on specifically the technology and what we see as best practice to support having that infrastructure in place to make it nice and easy for your staff and employees. Next slide. So essentially, the foundation of any home working solution is ensuring that there is a way of connecting from wherever it is you choose to work. So if we talk about the home, you know, we've seen there has been a huge rise from the residential internet service providers in home broadband usage as a result of the pandemic, and an indirect result of that increase has meant that speeds have decreased slightly due to the number of people using broadband at any given time on residential circuits. So just to put another factor out there, whilst we talk a lot about superfast fibre, actually, you know, a quarter of the UK's population, or the UK's households rather, are just about managing on speeds of less than 10 megabytes per second. Next slide. So there are things that you can do as a firm, as an organisation to help here. So we would always recommend doing an audit of what speeds people are getting currently. You know, if people are getting good speeds, that's a good indicator that they're going to be able to facilitate home working. There's also a means of being able to check to see what speeds are available on a household by household basis. So any telecoms provider can help you with this. It may be that there are better products out there on the residential market than what people have at the moment. So it can be a good opportunity to look at changing. And essentially every single postcode in the UK can be searched upon and given an idea of speed. So there are a variety of places to do this, but we can certainly help with that. Next slide, please. So the real difficulty with home broadband comes into play when there are other users in the household. So if we pick on children as an example, you know, once children get home from school, you know, the usage and the ability to get good speeds at 3:30, 4 o'clock onwards into the early evening drops dramatically. And if you're a household with lots of other users in there that are streaming, listening to music, watching movies, etc., then there can be a real battle to grab that broadband speed that you need to do things like video calls, online meetings, and such. So one of the things that a lot of our customers have asked us for, which we've recommended, is to actually provide a dedicated separate connection just for you in your home for business usage. This doesn't get used by anybody else in the home, and this can either be one of two things. This can be a physically separate wired connection for business use that's managed by the telecoms provider of the law firm, or it could alternatively be a mobile data connection. With the emergence of 5G now, you're starting to see speeds of in excess of 100 meg on 5G. So quite easily you can set up a data SIM inside a dongle or a MiFi device. And that can be used quite often to get a better and faster speed in your home than what you would have on your wired connection. And these are all services that are available or can be available to you on monthly rolling contracts. So we're not worrying about committing to 18-month, 2-year contracts. These are flexible solutions to help you and your law firm and your staff in scenarios where these are required. Next slide, please. Mobiles, again, 90% of lawyers already report using smartphones for law-related tasks while away from the office. I would suggest that a similar process can be put in place. We offer our customers lots of flexible and temporary contracts on business mobiles to help support them working from home where necessary. We found that a lot of our clients have looked to give their home-based workers a choice of how they want to communicate. Do they want to use a form of landline, or do they want to use a mobile? And you know, there's a vast variety of handsets available on the marketplace, but similarly, you know, people are free to bring their own device. Next slide. When we start delivering smartphones or mobile phones out into the workplace, and even more so in a remote or home-based environment, every single smartphone out there is compatible with cybersecurity software to protect client data. So we would always recommend that from a protection of client data perspective, for a tiny fee per month, that some layer of mobile device management security software is put on the device for the sole reason of protecting client data should that mobile device fall into the wrong hands, become lost or stolen. It's an absolute no-brainer in our eyes, but it's essential to kind of give yourselves that layer of protection. Next slide. Now, the biggest workload that we've been involved with, or certainly probably for the last 9 years, but it's become compounded in the last 12, 13 months, is moving to the cloud from a telephony perspective. So I'll put this statistic out there about today, over 84% of SMEs in the UK have implemented cloud technology, but that is significantly lower in the legal sector. So there are still an awful lot of law firms that haven't yet moved to the cloud for telephony, and this is something that is essential really for home or agile working. Next slide. The main reason, so the main headlines of moving to cloud, it will cost you nothing up front. There's a zero capital outlay. Devices are provided completely free of charge. There's a choice of how you connect to the cloud now, whether you use a traditional phone on the desk, whether you use software on your laptop or PC, or whether you use an app on your mobile. It's super secure. So, the risk of being subjected to fraudulent calls being made on your behalf to international premium numbers is minimized, and it's managed and it's mitigated. But it's essentially, there is a huge drop in the cost of calls for your firm, and that has been realised quite a lot recently, because for those firms that haven't yet moved to the cloud, the cost of diverting all your existing calls to fee earners' mobiles has often meant that the monthly phone bill has tripled, quadrupled, and it's a huge cost. With the cloud, diverted or outbound calls all become free. So next slide, please. So again, the cloud is by its very nature all about flexibility. So I myself have worked from home for the last 12, 13 months. I haven't got a desk phone at home. I either use an app on my mobile if I'm wandering around the house, or typically I'm sat with a headset connected to my laptop, and that's how I make and receive my calls. But we find that it's great to give people choice on what they feel comfortable with, and the cloud telephony will support that. Next slide, please. So I know Martyn and Alex touched on the idea of not going all big brother and trusting staff and fee earners, and we certainly see that lots of our law firm clients have been really interested in looking at how reporting software can benefit the management of remote teams. And what we've found, I think, is this isn't to check on how many calls are being made, how many calls are being answered, but from a client experience perspective, if you as a law firm value yourselves on being able to be out and being available, being able to answer the phone quickly, having reception do that, if we decide what the outcome should be, i.e., answering a phone call within X amount of rings without physically seeing people anymore, then reporting software can be used really, really easily just to ensure that those parameters are being met. And equally, just to ensure that if any calls are coming into the law firm and are being missed, let's try and capture those calls and possibly, try and get back in touch with those people who have rang in. It's an opportunity to draw those inquiries back in. So we see call reporting being used to kind of not so much to check up on the staff themselves, but just to ensure that the clients or potential clients are getting the best experience that they can when they contact you as a law firm. Next slide, please. So and this software can give you an insight not only across telephony, but it can be covered on emails, it can be covered on web chats, or any manner of communication or channel that you make yourselves available to your clients on. Next slide. So the last item that I wanted to touch on was the idea of call recordings. So typically not many of our law firm clients historically would have recorded their calls. That there isn't kind of compliance reasons to do that. But what we've found, again, just going back to the clients themselves, it's a great place to be able to kind of for fee earners and secretaries to be able to go back and pull the details of those conversations, and obviously, you know, ensure that facts are checked with clients. But ultimately, you know, in an ever-growing paper-light industry, what call recordings can do is ensure that you move to a fully digital case file that's embedded within your case or practice management software. Next slide. So, yeah, ultimately, the idea of home or remote working, you know, we want to ensure that this method does boost productivity, it does improve management, and it does enhance the client's experience. So, if we can provide the tools to do that, they are there, they are available, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if anybody has any at the end of the presentation. Next slide, Pauline. Thanks everyone for listening. I'm going to hand over to Nicola at this point.
Great. Oh,
Thank you very much, Victor. Nicola, I'm very pleased to introduce Nicola Poole, the Managing Director of Hedges Law, to talk to us through their extraordinary journey and how they are managing their teams, particularly on the cultural side. So pleased to introduce you, Nicola.
Great. Thank you for listening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to share with you today the story of transformation, really, and tell you how a law firm has changed more in a year than in the previous 231 years. I wanted to talk about how a little nugget of an idea I had, a kind of idea, a seed deep in my brain that started to germinate and grow, has been enabled in the last 12 months to burst into life and actually become a wonderful new reality. Next slide. So this cartoon always makes me smile, but I am in fact super proud of my firm's incredible heritage. Hedges Solicitors, as it was then, began in 1789. So that's the year of the French Revolution, around the time of the birth of Charles Dickens. And the business has in fact been delivering legal services across 4 separate centuries, through 2 world wars, 9 kings and queens have come and gone, and 64 prime ministers. The Hedges family were a key part of our local history, very much interwoven into the fabric of the town. Wallingford, which is in South Oxfordshire, and that's where their legal practice was based. In fact, it was Oliver Cromwell who burned down the original site of Wallingford Castle that had been built by William the Conqueror in 1066. And 150 years on from that, the Hedges family bought it. So they were a very wealthy, highly regarded family, kind and philanthropic. And the law firm was handed down from generation to generation until about 1984, when Sir John Hedges, who was the last Hedges owner, he died and had no children. So I turned up at this very old-fashioned firm about 18 years ago just to fill a part-time maternity cover for a year. And I'm now its sole owner and the managing director. I never intended to stay. In fact, I only took the temporary locum role because I was going stir crazy at home, climbing the wall. I love my children, but me home alone with them wasn't really great for either of us. And the reason I stayed at Hedges was because even though it felt stuck in the dark ages and a bit like a crumbling old building that needed absolutely everything doing to it, I could really see its massive potential, and I couldn't quite bear to leave it to fall down. So instead, you know, madly in many ways, I took on the task of lovingly renovating this business bit by bit, month by month and year by year. And in the time since I've taken over and run it, we've trebled in turnover. And I think it's fair to say we've made the transition from high street practice to high-end law firm. Next slide, please, Pauline. And yet, despite this hard work and relentless efforts to modernise the business, I still felt that we were a law firm in that traditional model. And we were still expecting our teams to be at their desks, head down by 9, and kudos to those who worked late. We had 2 big offices, each person with their own desk, many with rooms of their own because they were senior lawyers. If they went away for 2 weeks, the offices sat empty and I still had to pay to heat and light them. We spent a fortune on paper, post, DX, heating, lighting, rent, rates. paper destruction, file storage, file retrieval. You know that list, and it goes on and on. So we trimmed and we trimmed and we trimmed, but I could never seem to do more than increase the margin by a fraction. I put their career and family choice. You know, it may have been the 21st century, but I never felt, and all the more so as a working mother myself, I never felt that I got the model right. You know, it still felt that those lawyers who went off on maternity leave to have babies had a horrible choice to make. They really had a decision either to return and leave their babies in nurseries for 10-hour days or give up their careers. You know, we just didn't offer them the flexibility or agility to really allow them to combine the two. And as well as our long-standing Wallingford office, we'd opened about 10 years ago a beautiful office right in the heart of Oxford City. But both offices were in locations that were commuter nightmares. They were huge local traffic hotspots, so that people generally had a commute of about an hour or more. And both offices were in areas where house prices were unaffordable to most. In 2019, the average house price in Oxford was 12 times the average salary. School catchments were ferociously competitive, and that created a further barrier to recruitment. And then we had client service inflexibility. And what I mean is, you know, our working hours were 9 to 5 or maybe 8 till 6. And although in the end I won my fight with our long-standing receptionist not to close our offices for the lunch hour, yeah, really, our traditional model meant that for the high-end clients we were targeting, we were generally only available for meetings in the hours that they themselves were working. You know, in pre-COVID, video conferencing facilities were highly expensive, complex. They required pre-booking, and the IT guy had to come and set them up. Clients didn't really like the idea of video calls much more than the lawyers did. And I guess in short, our legal services were delivered in the way that lawyers wanted to deliver them, not in the way that suited our clients. And finally, our IT infrastructure was incredibly traditional too. It was complex. There were multiple points of failure, multiple suppliers, high security risk, productivity failures, very expensive. I'm going to come back to that later. If you could just do the next slide, please, Pauline. So I had a bit of a vision, and for years I wondered why the working hours had to be 9 to 5. You know, who said that every job had to be done Monday to Friday, 9 to 5? I kept questioning why we all sat for hours each day in commuter traffic to go to this brick building to do our job. Why lawyers had to wear suits or formal attire to be taken seriously. How it was that we all knew how to send an email on a Sunday, but nobody was going to movies on a Monday. And why a grown man of 40 who I employed felt like he needed permission to go to the dentist at 4 in the afternoon. You know, why were grown people being treated like children? I questioned why agile and flexible working wasn't deemed suitable for lawyers, and why being a great lawyer and a great parent was somehow mutually exclusive. So I started to plan a new way of running Hedges, of becoming an agile, flexible company that was fit for the 21st century. And I had it all really clear in my head. But you all know how lawyers are with change. And although we made small gains along the way, and we slowly moved forward a little bit to a more modern way of doing things, it still felt like pushing mud uphill. You know, it was like the analogy of the old building that I talked about earlier. We kept making small improvements and tried new ways of doing old things, but it just wasn't happening as we wanted it to. Next slide, Pauline. Yeah, and then COVID arrived and hit us all, didn't it? Like a big truck. And on the evening of 22nd of March, I think it was, Boris came on air and told us all to stay home. So little did we know then, as we prepared for what we were told was a 3-week lockdown to flatten the curve, that we would be pretty much locked away for most of a year, and that we'd come out the other end with the world of work, as everybody's talked about already, the world of work being a completely different place. So next slide, please, Pauline. Let me tell you about this transformation. So in the 6 months before COVID turned up, I had finally lost the plot with our awful IT system. You know, we decided that we were ready to make a leap from the old to the new, and we committed to put in place a fantastic new system called Action Step that we'd found, that had come up from New Zealand. We'd researched it and basically fallen in love with it. Our data was ready to migrate and we were good to go live on the 1st of April 2020. So exactly 1 week after lockdown, we were due to put in place a new practice management system. So obviously lockdown got announced, and my initial response was, look, we're going to have to put the project back. You know, there's no way we can expect our staff who are working from home for the first time to cope with an entirely new way of working and a new practice management system, and with no support, you know, stuck at home. My co-director, a very, very modern thinker, begged to differ. He said, this is the new world, Nikki. It's going to work from the first minute. You know, we can literally just switch it on and go. But I didn't believe him. You know, over the last 30 years of my career, I've experienced numerous system implementations, and every single one of them had been incredibly painful, loads of downtime, months of training staff, eye-watering costs of, you know, specialists to come in and program the system to do what we initially thought it would do anyway. Slow data transfer, unhappy staff, angry clients, lost productivity. You've all been there, okay? So my co-director and I argued and argued, and in the end, this is very uncharacteristic, but I lost the argument. Still quietly convinced it would be a total disaster, I was essentially persuaded that the switchover should go ahead on the 1st of April. So with everyone working from home, most of them, as I say, for the first time in their lives, we transitioned to Action Step on the 1st of April, and it happened without a glitch. We onboarded 40 staff online. There was no walking the floor of trainers, no installation consultants at £5,000 a day. In fact, we made no capital outlay at all for the system. The business barely broke its stride, and we have genuinely never looked back. And just briefly, if you don't know Action Step, you certainly should. It's a complete legal practice management system built in the cloud, and it was originally designed with workflow at its heart. So it's case management, document automation, email integration, billing, and accounting. As I say, truly cloud-based. It has world-class support, genuinely. And get this, there are no fixed term contracts. You just turn it on when you want and you turn it off when you want. So no capital outlay, as I've said. And I think it was Martyn earlier who was talking about, you know, visibility and reporting. Well, Action Step gives us visibility literally at the touch of the button. I can see every single piece of work, every single piece of work done by every single user on the system right across the business. So yeah, it was Martyn, wasn't it? Talking about visibility of teams when they're remote, we have full visibility. So I think you can hear how much I love Action Step. I do need to give a quick plug to the guys who implemented the whole thing for us. They're called Cloudify Legal. They are the approved Action Step implementers. So if anybody would like an introduction, let me know. Next slide, please. So alongside the move to Action Step on the 1st of April, we also moved from the kind of old-fashioned traditional hosted environment using Outlook into Google Workspace. So Hedges Law now runs entirely on Google. We have full ISO 27001 data and security compliance, and our entire Google ecosystem runs at a cost of only £25 per user per month. £25 per user a month. So I'll come back to that in more detail in a minute. We use Gmail for emails, Google Docs for real-time collaborative documents. So no old world track changes, version control, that's all gone. We have instant messaging on Google Chat, so staff can quickly tap away messages. And we have the fantastic Google Meet for instant video calls, and that's between ourselves or with clients. All of that is included in the £25 per month per user that we pay. So no additional cost like Teams or Zoom. We have Google Voice Detect in place of Big Hand. It's super effective. It's free. So again, no more high cost and tie-in. So in short, the transition has meant a huge goodbye and happy goodbye to kind of annual licenses are gone, long expensive contracts, hot noisy servers, Mimecast, NetDocs, and all those other kind of overheads that we were told for years and years were absolutely essential. So, you know, Hedges has kind of said a huge hello to secure collaboration and productivity, and genuinely feels like we run the business in a 21st century way. To top it all, our productivity in revenue terms has grown in the last year by 177%. And then the final benefit is the fact that we have no more infuriating, costly and wildly unreliable support service providers. You know, the company that sits between you and your system. I remember one day about 18 months ago when our entire system went down for the whole day. I'll leave it to you to work out the cost of £300 an hour for 40 users for 8 hours. But, you know, to put things in context, think about when did you ever need to call Google for help with your Google searches or email? And of course, when's the last time you had to wait for Google to load up the latest version of anything? So new slide, please, Pauline. This is just really a review we got in the middle of lockdown number 2. Unlike many firms, Hedges embraced technology, making dealing with them much more frictionless. It's a great review from a client. Excuse me. So next slide, please. Pauline, if you just want to kind of click through. This is quite a complex slide, and I'm not going to dwell on it. I'm conscious of the time, but what I wanted to do was to show you the way that most law firms work in a hosted environment versus the way that we now work in what's called a zero trust environment. So our new world is based on Google's zero trust model. In short, and I'm not a techie, but in short, it's a security concept centered on the belief that organizations shouldn't automatically trust anything inside or outside its perimeters, but essentially should verify anything and everything before granting access. So the old system of hosted desktop is that you essentially build a huge firewall around each individual office that you run, which is why you require a third-party provider to do so. So it's a bit like a prison, if you will. It's built to keep everyone inside, and once you're inside, it's okay. But of course, woe betide you're a genuine employee trying to get in from the outside and actually work. You know, we've all had the buffering circle where you try to connect through, I don't know, Citrix or VPN or something. So you do have to build really complex, expensive systems to get in. And of course, the irony is if the baddie out there is able to breach security and get in, once they've done so, they can roam wherever they like within the system. You know, once they've breached that initial data security system, they're in. Zero trust, in contrast, means that every user and every device has its own protection around it, a kind of protective layer. And you absolutely don't need a huge infrastructure to achieve that. So going forward, we can scale the business as much as we like without obscene additional cost. We can add new applications that we need quickly and easily. Obviously, guys, you've talked about a number of different applications that you run for Calico clients. Recently, we've brought on board bundle docs for the new paperless court proceedings. The courts don't want big fat bundles anymore. Everything's done online. We use Perfect Portal for conveyancing quotes, but of course, it's all connected to our system with an API. And the most significant thing, of course, is the cost. So you can see the total costs that we were looking at. The costs then and now are essentially night and day. £115,000 a year, and now we pay £15,000 a year. But most importantly of all, our staff are just happy because it just works. It all just works wherever they are. Victor, I think you mentioned internet speeds earlier, and clearly it's a huge and very important issue for some systems in law firms. But of course, Google spent huge sums making all of their tech super efficient on normal bandwidth. So pretty much without exception, our staff have no issue at all connecting and having full accessibility. So yeah, I mean, our staff keep on telling us how much they love the new world, and I do wonder how many business owners, law firm business owners, can genuinely hand on heart say that their lawyers love their systems. So next slide, please, Pauline. The 3 weeks of lockdown came and went, and of course, working from home began to feel rather normal, didn't it? And our new system, we could move rapidly to paperless working, which we did. Our team could just switch on and go, as I've already said. And so it came to June, 3 or 4 months on, and the government started to talk about lifting restrictions, coming out of lockdown. And I started to feel a bit anxious. I kind of was thinking, I I don't really know that I want us to go back to the old ways. What about that awful commute? What about all those savings that we've been making in paper and staff travel? We saved an absolute fortune. DX, postage, shredding, heating, lighting, cleaners, you know. And I did feel a bit guilty about not really wanting to go back to normal and not particularly feeling enthusiastic about picking up where we left off. So I decided to run a survey across the business and ask the staff what they wanted. And to my genuine shock, they were unequivocal. I think it was about 90% said that they were much more productive at home. And I think 85% who said they would definitely like to continue working in a fully flexible, agile way. So I took a huge deep breath, really did put my big girl pants on and just took a decision to close our Oxford City Centre office, our beautiful showcase office in the middle of Oxford. We decided just to go for it and go fully remote. So within 3 weeks of making the decision, we'd sublet our full-story office. We'd negotiated with a local accountancy practice to put 6 hot desks into a small business hub in their vast empty office. And we turned our historical office in Wallingford into a smart business hub as well. So we now have a whole suite of bookable hot desks. They're all set up with double screens, video cameras, speakers, so our people can come along with a Chromebook or a laptop, plug in, and they're good to go. And I decided that rather than taking the kind of let's just see how it goes approach, I'd be bold and shout about our decision. So I put this out of office post that you can see here, I put that up on LinkedIn, and this is what I wrote. Today I closed my office and I couldn't be happier. Hedges Law is now a fully agile, remote-based business. We can work anytime, anywhere, on any device. We'll continue to provide legal services to meet the needs of our clients, but in a way that suits their and our lives. Our clients can meet with us online at one of our 2 new business hubs in Oxford or Wallingford, or wherever they jolly well want. Our 21st century way of working might mean that we're low on suits and ties, but trust me, we're terrific at delivering law in the way our clients want it. Welcome to our new world. We can't wait to see you there. And that post, ladies and gentlemen, has had 45,000 views so far. So it just shows you maybe it's worth shouting about it. Next slide, please. So our new normal, as you click through, our new normal is any time, any place, on any device. We really are wholly agile. We have a small team of, I think, 5 document assembly and reception staff based full-time in the office, but the rest of our team are fully agile. And I truly believe, and gentlemen preceding me have talked about it, I truly believe that employers who don't have this ability to give their staff flexibility and agility are going to stumble and fall in the coming year. So this change means we've been able to recruit new staff remotely. There are people in our business who've worked with us for a year now and only visited the office once or twice. The change means we've been able to cast a far wider recruitment net. So we now have lawyers who work for us in Bournemouth, London and Cheltenham. And finally, the change has meant that we are no longer focused on being a local law firm. Being location agnostic means we've got a far greater reach of clients. And maybe that's also added to our kind of increase in turnover. So Pauline, my final slide, please. So there's no doubt that having everyone either in the office or everyone at home was far simpler than this hybrid model that's now emerging. I think going forward, it is going to be far more complex for law firm owners in terms of managing that mix. You know, some clients will remain using video calls, some will want to come into the business hubs, some will do both. Similarly with staff, some will only want to be in the office, some will only want to be out of the office, and some will mix it up. I think a huge change that's coming will be the way in which the office space that we do have is going to be used. You know, as people start tentatively emerging from lockdown, I can already see that the office won't be used for that productive work, but in fact for that personal and professional development and for social contact and human connection. You know, it's going to be, the purpose of coming to the office is going to be about seeing people and having that connection. So with that in mind, last weekend, we went in and cleared out an enormous bank of, I think, 8 or 10 workstations, and we've created a new business lounge. with sofas and soft chairs, low tables, lamps, so that staff now have a designated space to make that connection. You know, we're proactively empowering them to do that. It gives them a relaxed meeting place to talk, to chat through files, for supervision and collaboration. You know, rather than that old way of either having to book a meeting room to have a formal kind of meeting, or that sort of hovering by someone's desk for a chat. Another big change we're making, and I believe that this is going to become endemic, is dropping that terminology of working from home or working from the office. The language we now use is about office-based working and non-office-based working, because we do recognise that for some people, particularly the younger employees, working at home actually meant working in your bedroom or your landing or your hallway. So, you know, you may not be in the office, but you may be working from your local coffee shop or your gym or the cafe or one of our business hubs. Another change is no more presenteeism. You know, we've ditched that whole 9 to 5 regime. And I think, as Victor said earlier, it's all about output. You know, what we do now is we agree the metrics for each person's deliverable. And then how they meet those figures, you know, how they reach their KPIs is entirely up to them. We are treating them like grown-ups at last. In terms of challenges, I am very aware indeed of the importance of keeping that sense of team. And it's an absolute priority for me that the Hedges culture remains alive and very strong, that people feel very anchored to the business as an entity. So each team meets virtually once a week, same time, same day, every single week. And we hope, obviously, from next month that those will take place in person. We've continued monthly company meetings on video. So all staff have attended every single month through lockdown. Again, they'll hopefully resume in person next month. At those meetings, we share the wins, we share client testimonials, good news, and we have absolute 100% transparency on the financials. So every single person in our business is able to understand and know the revenue, the profit, the performance. On the social side, we're planning a huge end of lockdown summer party. I've given the entire company the day off on the 21st of June, which is supposedly the first kind of back to normal day. So as a thank you for kind of getting us through the year and supporting the business, that's my thank you to them. We've done little things. You've all talked about it, guys. We've sent Valentine gifts to each staff members as a little surprise, that random act of kindness I think you talked about, Martyn. We have monthly love awards that stands for living our values every day. So those are for employees who have really exemplified our company values, and those values having been more important than ever as we've gone through lockdown. You know, we're doing online yoga, and I'm told there's a lunchtime knitting circle that's emerged. So really, guys, just to conclude, if I have no other message for you today, it's that the very first step to taking your team remote is to make sure you've got the right platform, the right technology for that to be achievable. You know, it could be a total disaster to have the idea of your staff working remotely if you don't have the right systems in place. I've heard the analogy used of a swimming pool. You know, if you put people in a pool of water, they'll swim. If you put them in a pool of treacle, they'll probably swim too, but it will be really hard, deeply unpleasant. They'll get angry and frustrated, and in no time at all, they're going to exit, aren't they? So if you don't have systems to enable remote teams in place, and you have to force your staff back into work in the office full time, again, various of the speakers have alluded to it today, if you're forcing them back because there is no other option, I think you're really going to struggle. You know, people are looking over their shoulder, seeing employers enable flexible working, and they're just going to demand and expect it. I think, Pauline, you mentioned survey results that the hybrid model is very much what employees are going to be demanding, and they will move jobs to achieve it. Nationwide announced this week, I think all 13,000 of their staff are now free to choose exactly where they work. So thank you for indulging me in sharing my story today. I certainly can't sit here and say we've got it 100% right, and I'm sure the year ahead will contain as many learnings as the last year has done. But if you've got any questions, I'm here to answer them. And yeah, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Nicola. It's been a fascinating talk. We are overrunning by about 15 minutes, so no, not your fault at all, Nicola. It's just a combination of all the fascinating speakers. We had 4 speakers today, so it's a lot to get through. Thank you to everyone who has remained on the call with us, and I hope you found something of use and insight today from all of them, and some hints and tips that will help you manage your remote teams moving forward. I do have one last request from me to you. For those that are still on the call, would you mind just indicating for me what you would like some follow-up information about, or a general chat about how Calico members could help your firm, almost like a mini business review for 15 minutes with myself, just to go through any areas that you've got opportunities or challenges on, or projects that haven't happened, or anything really. I'm happy to host a call with you, 15-20 minutes. We can go through a whole sort of 360-degree mini business review, and I can point you in the right direction. So I'm just going to leave this on the screen for 30 seconds if you'd like to vote. It is private, so I'm not going to share the results or anything. So it's just between me and you at this stage, and then we could do some follow-up. Thank you very much. I'll give you a few seconds. And then if you would like to stay, and you don't have to rush off to another meeting, do stay in the chat room. We'll take the presentation down and turn the recording off, and we can have a chat. If there's any questions you've got for our speakers, do stay on the line. Thank you very much. And you can always get hold of me via the info@calicolegalgroup.co.uk for any comments, questions, or ideas for the next ones. Thank you very much.